Photographing action sports is both exhilarating and challenging at the same time. To capture compelling shots, you're going to need to know the basics of both photography as well as the environment of shooting action sports. So today, I'm going to be breaking down the most important basic things that you should know before going out to photograph action sports. You need to understand your camera and its settings, especially the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Action sports is always moving so quickly, so it requires those fast adjustments. It's a good thing to go through your camera settings and set up those custom function buttons that will allow you to make those quick adjustments on the fly. For example, one of the things that I set up that I absolutely love is the end ring on my RF lens is controlling the ISO. It's really nice to have that for those quick exposure changes. You should also know the limitations of your gear, like does it have a slower shutter? Maybe it only shoots like 6 to 8 frames per second. That's going to affect how you shoot and how you time those peak moments of action. When you know these things inside and out, you're not going to be missing those important moments because your timing was on point and you were properly exposed. The second thing is choosing the right gear to get the job done. There's certain tools for every job that just makes that job so much easier. I know that camera bodies are a big topic, but I don't really want to touch on that in this video because I don't feel as though the camera you have or the camera that you own is a prerequisite to going out and taking action sports photos. I feel like the more profitable things that we could be talking about are possibly the lenses that we could use, ND filters, and camera straps that'll keep your camera secure while you're shooting. I'm only briefly going to touch on these things because I have a video specifically dedicated to the best action sports photography gear, but I'm going to touch on these things in a slightly different angle. So lenses. How do we choose the best lens to get the job done? I like to shoot the full environment with a wide angle lens and then go to those close-up moments with a telephoto lens, having that shallow depth of field. For some people though, just looking to get into action sports photography and not make a huge investment right off the start, buying a telephoto lens is kind of out of the question. So the only workaround there is to get up close with your athlete and close the gap. Honestly though, most times I'd rather just get up close with my subject because I feel like it's more raw, and to a viewer, it makes them feel like they're living that experience. But it really does depend on the environment and the sport that you're shooting, because some sports don't allow you to get right up close. And if all you have is a wide angle lens, then all you have are wide angle photos. So if you are looking to get into shooting these sports more full time, I would definitely recommend getting a telephoto lens like the 70-200. I made a video specifically talking about the best lenses for action sports photography, so I'll link that below. Another piece of gear that you really should be having in your bag when you go to shoot is an ND filter. When you have an ND filter when you're shooting action sports, it really opens up a lot of creative options. Let's say for example, you want motion blur in your photos. Well, okay, you're gonna have to bring down your shutter speed. But what happens when you bring down your shutter speed? The image gets brighter. There's only two ways to fix that: your aperture and an ND filter. But most times you're going to want a lower aperture because you want to create depth between your subject and their environment. So your only other option is go with an ND filter. When you put on an ND filter, it allows you to have that creative motion blur as well as it allows you that shallow depth of field. The last piece here that I want to highlight is something that keeps your camera safe, and it also protects your investment of thousands of dollars. One of the best tools that I found to keep my camera safe while I'm out shooting is the clutch strap by Peak Design. I never really liked the neck straps because I always felt like they got in my way when I was shooting, and they were a little bit uncomfortable as well. So ever since I got the clutch strap, I've never taken it off and went back to a neck strap. I just threw those things out, basically just like left that thing on my camera full time, and that is specifically what I use. I just wanted to take a quick 30-second break to let you guys know about my newsletter that's linked below. In each email that I'm sending out, I'm giving tips and tricks on how I'm personally leveling up my action sports photography. I'm also going to be sharing a lot of behind the scenes from recent shoots that I've been on, do exclusive teaching on those shoots that's only going to be available to my newsletter subscribers. I'm also going to be adding in my personal favorite LUTs that I created that I've been using all summer long, so don't miss out on that. Okay, let's get back to the video. So the third action sports photography basic to know is how shutter speed affects your photos. Having a faster shutter speed will freeze your action, where a slower shutter speed is going to add motion blur. A good rule of thumb is start off with 1/500th of a second and then adjust based on your subject's speed or the look that you're trying to create. If there's a certain shutter speed that you like and you want to keep, shutter priority can actually be really helpful. I can't say that I use it because I'm a manual guy, but I do know people that use it often and they really like it. The fourth principle that you should know is aperture and depth of field. To help your viewer know where they should be looking when they see your photo, it's important to separate your subject from their environment. When we look at this photo with an aperture of f2.8, you'll notice that the background is blurred out and my subject is the main focus. Also, having that strong separation will help within the editing process because you're going to be able to pull a really clean subject selection mask. The fifth is understanding how to shoot in low light. If you haven't already, you're going to encounter these times where you're out shooting golden hour and then it quickly dips into the blue hour and it gives off a completely different vibe, which is really sweet. But the only way to add light back into your photos is by raising your ISO. But don't be afraid to shoot with those higher ISOs because you're going to be able to pull back a lot of detail in post-production. production. You don't want to go overboard though. Only use the highest ISO that you absolutely need. This is where really knowing your camera and the images that it produces comes into play, because sometimes you can get away with underexposing in those shadows and then raising them up in post. One thing to make sure of though when you're shooting in these night scenes is that you're shooting in RAW. This is going to give you the most flexibility out of your images possible. One of the new AI tools that Lightroom actually came out with was a denoise tool, which works flawlessly. I actually made a video on that, which I'll also link below if you want to go check that out. The sixth thing to be familiar with is your burst modes. I know not all cameras have a high frames per second, but with whatever camera you have, go put that over into continuous shooting mode. This setting will allow your camera to capture the max amount of frames per second. When you use that setting, you're maximizing your chances to get the shot that you're looking for of your athlete when they're in the peak of their performance. If your camera has a slower shutter speed, then get comfortable with it so then you can time those moments perfectly. The seventh principle we're talking about is composition. In the world of action sports photography, anticipating where your subject is going to be is crucial. That's why it's so important to know the sports that you're shooting, because you'll be familiar with where the athlete is going to be positioned as well as their timing. Also, don't get too tied down to one spot. Be ready to move as the action unfolds, because each different angle is going to tell a different story, and that's going to help you put together a cohesive narrative that you're going to be sharing to your clients or on social media. Also, be really intentional with things like the rule of thirds, leading lines, and other composition techniques that are visually appealing. Those things pulled together really make a great photo. Sometimes when you're shooting, it can be hard to like pull yourself out of that environment, but you'll really thank yourself later when you just take that step back, kind of analyze everything, and then think about how you want to frame your photo. The eighth principle is practice and patience. Action sports photography takes a ton of practice. When I was just starting out, I was shooting what I thought was cool, and now I look back on those photos and with my definition of what I think is cool now, I kind of cringe. It really does take a few shoots under your belt to really get comfortable and understand the concepts like what we've been talking about with like shutter speed, properly exposing your image, and as well working in those high-paced, fast environments. But don't get discouraged though if your first attempts aren't perfect. Just keep learning, refining your skills, and add one more thing to work on every single photo shoot, and soon enough, you're gonna notice a massive difference in the work that you're doing. Now that we've covered the basics, I wanna share with you the 5 biggest mistakes that I see beginner action sports photographers make that you can completely avoid and level up that much faster. If you wanna see that video, click here. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.